Live from SABC studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Welcome to this week's final edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko, and on the show tonight,
violating the
Honorable Zungula, will you please take your seat?
I'm not done, Speaker.
Honorable Zungula,
I'm not done.
Take
Speaker,
your seat.
I'm a member.
I request you, Honorable Zungula, to leave the house.
We are not a nation defined by the oceans and the rivers that form the boundaries of our land. We are not defined by the minerals under our earth or the spectacular landscape above it.
I owe my being to the hills and the valleys, the mountains and the glades, the rivers, the deserts, the trees, the flowers, the seas, and the ever-changing seasons that define the face of our native land.
our panel for this evening looks at whether we can possibly infer what's on the minds of the nation's leaders through things they said or didn't say, actions they took or didn't take during last night's State of the Nation address. The Watchdog starts now. Well, let me first introduce you to our panel for this evening, all of them regulars on the show. Professor Bheki Mngomezulu is based at the Nelson Mandela University, where he is director of the Center for the Advancement of Non-Racialism and Democracy. Asanda Ngwasheng and Sandile Swana are independent political analysts. Welcome to you all, and thank you for agreeing to come on.
Good evening, and thank you for having us.
Well, I guess...
thank you for having us, Vuyo, and good evening to your listeners.
Thank you, Prof. I guess there were no surprises at the very beginning of last night's session. I mean, we've become accustomed to the EFF MPs taking turns, raising points of order. I guess the real surprise was perhaps the African Transformation Movement president, Vuyo Zungula, who employing the same strategy and, of course, being chucked out for that. Really, the first dramatic moment of the night. Let's take a look at how he reacted to that.
Thing that you did, Speaker, is to anticipate what will happen in the House by reading rules of Parliament. And that is in violation of Rule 90 in terms of the rules. The second point of order, Speaker, is that you are disrupting speakers when they are addressing you. And Speaker,
Honorable Zungula,
you are violating Rule 66.
Please take your seat, Honorable Zungula.
You are violating the
Honorable Zungula.
I don't know, Asanda Ngwasheng, do you think the EFF has started a trend that people or leaders like Vuyo Zungula now want to emulate?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious that everybody seems to think that the one way to be the highlight, or at least in the highlights package of SONA, is to disrupt. But what's sad and really kind of frustrating for me is that we know that the EFF every year is going to do this. And I think initially when they started doing it, it was innovative. It was a good kind of form of disruption, but it's actually getting tired now, and people do not have the patience or the humor particularly in what I spoke about yesterday as being the worst SONA for South Africa, the worst SONA for the ANC, and kind of the worst mood that South Africans have ever been, with people even asking whether we needed to have a SONA in the first place. So I don't think that it was a very good strategy, both on the EFF and the ATM side, to try and pull that stunt.
Mr. Swana, do you think South Africans will at some point, well, there are people already saying that, get tired of this?
Thank you so much, Puyo. Let me start off by highlighting the fact that this is a form of protest. And in a constitutional democracy, we do need to encourage protest, especially here in Africa, where we've seen many of our countries in the post-independence period, whether it's Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi, Angola, Mozambique, fall into the hands of the new ruling elites, native elites, who then just squander everything and destroy the freedom of the local population. So whilst I agree that a protest needs to be progressive and innovative, the fact that the EFF and Zungula are still at it, whilst the ANC is downgrading the country, stripping the country of infrastructure, and destroying the civilization of South Africa, to the extent that there are young heroes such as Zungula and the EFF who are prepared to stand against this deliberate destruction of our country, is very encouraging. And I think we need to support them and encourage them to continue and find more innovative ways of expressing that protest on a continuous and almost daily basis.
And that, Prof, is really, I mean, the one argument, I mean, from people who support or find nothing wrong with what these two parties did last night and what the EFF has, of course, been doing for a while. In other words, they raise the argument that there aren't too many options left to people who would disagree vehemently with what the governing party is or has been doing. Professor Mngomezulu? Okay.
Thank you very much. Yeah, my network is unstable. We are on load shedding. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. No, basically.
Okay. That line really not so great. We're going to try and redial Professor Mngomezulu. Let me throw that question, to you, Asanda Ngwasheng, to people who feel that, look, we don't really have too many options to really, for registering our dissatisfaction with what is going on.
I think that, there is some validity to that, because Parliament has become a rubber stamping, place for the ANC, and they are very quick to fight court cases, et cetera, and so there is a conversation to be had about the shrinking space for disagreement with the ANC. However, it is a bit disingenuous for the same EFF that is in negotiations with the ANC across Gauteng about municipalities, the same EFF that is signing deals with the ANC and partnering with the ANC, to now come to Parliament and tell us that they are trying to hold the ANC accountable. How can you be in a partnership, in a coalition, to govern with an organization that you are telling us has a leader that needs to be held accountable, that they're not holding accountable? And so there has to be consistency in the messaging and consistency in the actions. And that is what makes me say what I said earlier, because they have lost their credibility by partnering with the same ANC at municipal level and then coming at national level and telling us a different story. If they were not partnering, I would believe it. I would think it was great. I would, as I said, suggest that they find new, more interesting strategies that are are going to be a lot more effective than doing the same strategy for like, it's almost 10 years now of the same strategy. And clearly it hasn't worked, and they need to find a new path. And, they need to be honest and not be disingenuous and kind of doing one thing on the right and then another thing on the left and expecting us to think, on the right or the left.
But rightly or wrongly, Mr. Swana, the people will say, look, this is politics. You make your point whichever way you can, but of course there are others who say, where do you draw the line? But those who argue the former say, look, up until you had your EFFs doing the things that it has been doing, it's been business as usual, even though nothing much or not much has changed since.
I think that the fact that tonight we're talking about the EFF is a clear sign that we feel their impact on society. I think Jacob Zuma was an immovable object in our political space, and the EFF was able to shift him out of space, completely out, and the EFF played a major role in leading that campaign against Jacob Zuma. And then on another note altogether, let's then say this. One of my criticism of Cyril Ramaphosa is that Cyril Ramaphosa was in the ANC, he was in the Zuma cabinet, he was chairman of the deployment committee. And later on, he claims that he always wanted change. But whilst he was inside there, he was not protesting vehemently. He was not resigning from anything. He was not doing anything. But if you look at Deng, for instance, in China, the person who brought us this growth that we've seen in China from 1979 onwards, at some point he was exiled in the Communist Party of China. So you can be inside a party that is doing wrong and even in partnership with a party that is doing wrong, as long as you are vehemently opposing wrongdoing and corruption and failures and mediocrity within that party. You don't need to be outside or out of alliance with that. The last thing I want to say about this is that the alliance between the ANC and the EFF is a child of the DA. The parents of that alliance is the DA. The mother and father of it is the DA. Because the DA chose to, when the opposition parties had agreed that the main object is to remove the ANC from power, not just because it is the ANC, but because the ANC had got incompetence, corruption, and non-performance. And that is what needed to be removed. And then the DA started attacking the EFF on the basis of fanonism of the EFF, that thing that says racism is violent and the fight of the EFF against white supremacy. So the DA went into a racist battle with the EFF, and that pushed the EFF into a position where it has got to now find political power with the enemy. And that is politics for them. So this is not something that happened at random. There are authors of this.
Now, Prof, I believe we have you on the line, albeit a telephone line. Whatever anyone may think of what the EFF and the ATM did last night, do you think that there is value or there are some benefits, certainly, for those opposition parties? In other words, would people see them as people who are doing something about what they find objectionable on the part of the governing party? In other words, you're not passing any moral judgment, but as an effective strategy, is it effective?
No, thank you very much. Yeah. In my power is back now. After this 10, then we can go back to the video. Okay, so basically, as I was saying before I was cut off, there are two sides to the coin. On the one hand, we have the EFF that is seen to be disrupting Parliament. And then, of course, they are arguing that by virtue of the fact that the president took Parliament to court, with the Speaker of Parliament being the first respondent, then it meant that he had no reason to address them. That is one side of the discussion. The other side of the coin is that at the moment, the issue is still sub judice, so which means the status quo remains. In other words, even if the Parliamentary is a real issue, which is what it is, by the way. But then, of course, because the issue is still before the court, then it means that the president has all the right to address the joint sitting of Parliament. This is one part of the argument. Then to come to a question as to whether this is benefiting the EFF, like Mr. SONA was saying, in a way it is, because when the EFF joined the Parliament, there were a number of changes that took place, and there was more vibrancy. Even people who are not watching parliamentary processes or meetings, they suddenly got interested in what was happening there. So from that front, then we would say that the EFF, in fact, is benefiting, more especially among the youth who have been impressed by the radical stance of the EFF. But for the elderly, it's a different ball game altogether, because they would look at the EFF and say, even if we wanted to support them, but then they are disrespectful, and then on those grounds, they would rather stay away from them and then join another political party. But the reality of the matter is, hypothetically speaking, if you remove the the ANC today from office, who is going to take over? At the moment, I don't see any party. The opposition party, that is the DA, it's more stronger in the Western Cape, and then with some pockets of support in Gauteng and Northern Cape, and then some parts of urban centers in KwaZulu-Natal. Other than that, it doesn't have significant presence throughout the country. Therefore, it rolls itself out as an option. The EFF is an upcoming party. I always say it's a party for the future. At the moment, it's not ready yet, but if you look at the trend, the voting trend, its numbers have been going up exponentially. So it means it's a growing party together with the IFP. The numbers are growing up, but the problem with the IFP is that, like the DA, it has more dominance in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. It doesn't have a footprint in other provinces. Therefore, it rolls itself out as an immediate option. Therefore, we have a problem.
Quick one, though, Prof, on what you said right at the beginning, which, of course, was the EFF leader, Julius Malema's very first argument when proceedings kicked off, that Cyril Ramaphosa, the president, had actually taken, Parliament to court, as he put it. But fact of the matter, though, is that they have been doing this long before that actually happened.
No, you have a point there, but I was just referring to the SONA. On this one, on this specific one, they had a case. But then, as I say, even in that case, there is the other side of the coin. Because the issue that the president of the EFF put on the table is not something that most people would disagree with in terms of facts. But then in terms of interpretation, of course, there will always be different opinions. But factually, Malema was right. And in fact, I must say, Vuya, that it shocked me when the presiding officer, that is the Speaker of Parliament, did not act harshly against both the EFF leader, that is Malema, and then also Seth Shibambo. And then immediately when Zungula ascended the stage, then he was the first one to be chucked out. I'm yet to be convinced as to whether the presiding officer was right in doing this. From my understanding, I think she acted prematurely and she was too harsh.
In fact, that's where we're going next, Prof. But before we go there, in other words, talk about the speaker and the things she said or didn't say, she did and didn't do last night, and what that means for the legislature. I just want to ask you this, Asanda. Do you think the EFF cares whether people judge it or don't like what it has been doing, what it did last night, what it did in the previous SONA and during those debates on the State of the Nation address? Do you think they care?
I think they don't care. That's literally brand EFF, that they're going to do what they're going to do, whether people like it or not. And that is what they've built their name on. And for the longest time, it has worked. And I think it's been an effective strategy, particularly for young people who see themselves as wanting to sort of color outside of the lines, as wanting to see more disruption in the status quo of Parliament, and wanting to see change. And I think, you know, the EFF has been very good at calling and naming a thing, particularly on issues of racism, particularly on issues of white supremacy. However, the very young people that they used to rely on, I think, are shrinking from their support base on a number of issues. We've heard people say that, you know, their stance on immigration is one thing that has led them to no longer support the EFF. We've heard people say that they are partnering with the ANC is a big one, because I think, you know, it's one thing to say things are politics, and it's good in politics to kind of look at deals separately and make whatever deals is strategic at the time. However, we are in an era where people are struggling to trust the ANC because the ANC speaks left and then does right. And what is needed is political parties and political leadership that is aligned. If you have to walk the talk, and you have to be aligned in every single aspect of your actions. And so if you're going to be against white supremacy but have no issues partnering with the DA, which is a political party that, you know, speaks about not being interested in race issues and at some points is very clearly about white interests, if you're going to partner with them to kick out the ANC, that says something to the voter that voted for the EFF because they stick it to the man, they stick it to white supremacy. If you're going to then partner with the ANC, again, that says something to the people who voted for the EFF because they trusted them to push back against the ANC and to kind of do the disruptions that they're doing in Parliament. And so we are in a time where, you know, the usual political strategy, maneuvering, and, you know, playing zero-sum games here and there while consolidating power was okay. We're not there. South Africans are tired of politicians who are not straight and who are kind of doing one thing on the left and doing another thing on the right. And so this is the wrong time for them to be, you know, seen to be duplicitous. And I think that is going to come back and hurt them in 2024, amongst the other issues that I've already highlighted. Never mind the fact that a lot of people have been saying that, you know, it's been 9 years of Julius Malema being in power. When is the EFF going to start showcasing new leadership? Right down to, we saw the Eastern Cape actually calling for Julius Malema's removal and a revival of the organization's leadership, such that other people could get the opportunities. And so there's a lot going in the EFF, and in terms of the kind of support that they're getting or not, and the kind of you know, people who are in opposition to them who previously were supporters.
In a moment, I want us to talk about the role of the National Assembly Speaker in all the drama that we saw playing itself out last night. That's coming up in a moment.
Deliberately, and I stated that 14G allows that if the presiding officer is of the view, right, or that a member is deliberately contravening a provision, and that's exactly what you have just done. I request you to leave the House. I do. I request you, Honorable Zungula, to leave the House. That the reason why I've removed Honorable Zungula is not about quoting a wrong rule, but that he defied my instruction. It has come to an end now, honorable members. Honorable Zungula defied my instruction.
Mr. Swana, I don't know what you make of that particular moment, because at first the Speaker said that he had, Zungula that is, quoted the wrong rule, and that was the reason he was sent packing. And then moments later says, oh no, that's not the reason. The real reason is that he defied my instructions. I don't know if there's anything to be said about her handling of that moment.
Yes, there's a lot to be said about the handling of that moment. We will hope that the members of Parliament as a whole will lodge a complaint against the Speaker related to this matter. The first thing that we need to remember is that when Zungula was going there, he made an announcement to the media. He was interviewed. And he said that he's going to protest by raising points of order. So the actions that Zungula took were premeditated. And unfortunately, although we don't have evidence at this stage, that could have meant that it gave the management of Parliament and the Speaker a chance to also premeditate and plan what they are going to do to him. There was a statement there that, and I think it was made by Zungula, that the reading of the rules and what have you before time was showing that the Speaker has got a premeditated agenda of what they want to do to those who are going to protest in Parliament. And this progressed, but what I want to highlight is that this type of dictatorship, this type of iron fist, we've seen it in Zimbabwe, we've seen it in a number of parts of Africa, where the native leaders, the native elites, as soon as they've gotten power, they then use that power to suppress democracy, to suppress freedom of speech and freedom of thought within our surrounding nations in SADC. And that is the problem that Nosiviwe Mapisa Nqakula and the African National Congress are starting to enter us in, to put us into introducing Stalinism in its purest form in South Africa.
But now, of course, her handling of the actual situation is one thing. But other people, that I remember asking this last year, other people are arguing or expect then as the presiding officers of Parliament to be fully equipped and prepared for whatever eventuality. Of course, all of that within the rules, because the EFF had actually warned that, or had told everyone what it was going to do. So you would expect, Prof, the presiding officers of Parliament to stand ready, for whatever eventuality. But all of that done, of course, within the rules of Parliament.
Vuyo, you're absolutely right. And I totally agree with Mr. Swana that a lot of things went wrong there, which is why earlier on I made the point that the Speaker of Parliament, in fact, acted prematurely when she chucked Zungula out. So you can tell, if you look at it in context, one, the EFF did not hide the fact that they were going to raise points of order, so it was known. And then, of course, as Mr. Swana is saying, the same also applies to Zungula. So in that case, then, it meant that the Speaker had to prepare herself for any eventuality. And that is basically the reason why, before the session started, she read a number of rules which govern the joint sitting of Parliament, which was correct from her side. But then the implementation part is a different story altogether. So unfortunately for the Speaker, which then weakens her position, is the question you asked that in fact, when she took a decision to kick Mr. Zungula out of Parliament, she cited a wrong reason. And then she didn't correct herself. She was actually corrected to say that Mr. Zungula did not, in fact, make a mistake. So then she had to correct herself then subsequently to say, no, I kicked him out is because he disobeyed me. When in fact, initially, she had said that Mr. Zungula quoted a wrong section. So that tells you that there was a panic button that was pressed. And then, of course, in a panic mode, you can take decisions which will come back to regret later. I think at the moment, now that the session is over, the speaker has been able to watch the proceedings, has been able to listen to Hansard, and now she knows exactly what happened. And I think she's feeling guilty about this whole thing. Obviously, I expected that Mr. Zungula will take the matter up as much as the EFF is also going to take the matter up. Then we'll see how things will unfold. If I were to be in the speaker's shoes and the legal team that is advising her, I would rather advise her to try and resolve this issue amicably outside of court, because it will be an embarrassment to say you kick someone out of parliament for the wrong reasons, and then you are corrected and then you rectify the situation later when Mr. Zungula is already out of parliament. So then what does it say legally? That is an issue that will need to be looked into.
Well, from a media briefing they held today, the EFF is making some demands. Let's take a listen to what the EFF leader, Julius Malema, had to say at that briefing about what they want the Speaker to do.
We get removed from Parliament. I'm sitting there. I spoke. After speaking, I sat down. From there, I never spoke again. My name gets read out. And then other colleagues' names are read out. From there, we are told, leave the house. But go backward and check what happened to Zungula. Zungula was warned 3 times. He was even told that, I warned you 3 times. I called you 3 times. And because you did not comply, I'm now going to ask you to leave the house. What is the difference between me and Zungula? Why am I not being called 3 times? Why am I not being told what is my offense? It doesn't matter how impatient you are. It doesn't matter how angry you are. Follow the rules.
Asanda Ngwasheng, they want the Speaker to apologize and withdraw her decision to eject EFF MPs using security forces or face a court action.
I think it's important to kind of that for us to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. So I think the EFF may have a case in that not every rule that was applied correctly, and so they do need to challenge it in court, and they do need to ask questions. But I'm just concerned about a political party that has had the same strategy for 9 years and has seen it, be effective to some extent, but never really in a way that has longevity. I'm concerned that people voted for a political party that hasn't been able to bring about creative solutions for dissent, i.e., wouldn't it have been interesting if we saw the EFF actually boycott the State of the Nation this time around? I think that would have sent a bigger message than what they ended up doing. And I think, it really was irritating at best. But when they then started to storm the stage, it kind of crossed the line, because you do have a sitting president. He does need to be protected physically as the sitting president of the country, whether we like him or not. And I would have said this even about Jacob Zuma, although I don't think much of the guy, because there is an office of the president. And as a country, we have a responsibility to ensure that whoever is holding that seat is physically safe. And the way in which they were storming, and knowing the ways in which when we act as individuals, we can be responsible. But once we are part of a big group, there is very little responsibility that can be taken for actions if somebody decides to kind of break the line further and push Cyril Ramaphosa or do something. Do you understand what I mean? So I think, to me, what it actually shows is a little bit of desperation, that they keep trying to push the envelope further and further and see what they can do, when they should be looking for different strategies that are not as predictable as this, that are not as obvious as this, and that are actually going to have us talking about them. Like I said, they could have boycotted and not been in parliament, and that would have caused many questions. And for me, what frustrates me is that we have opposition parties who are partly responsible for where we are. We are in the state in South Africa because they have failed to present a compelling stories to South Africans. They have failed to capture the imaginations of South Africans. South Africans would rather boycott voting than vote against the aid. That tells you something. Because if it was indeed that these opposition parties were telling a compelling story, people would get up and go and vote for these opposition parties. And we're going to be stuck with the ANC until they actually think about this and they apply their minds and they do something rather than these cheap politicking that haven't worked.
Well, here's what John Steenhuisen, the leader of the official opposition, the DA, had to say about that moment and the Speaker's handling of it.
Madam Speaker, at that stage that the security services rushed in, there was at that stage no threat to life or limb. Furthermore, they can only enter the chamber upon your invitation. That was not the case. They entered the chamber prior to you saying, I invite the security services in to stabilize the situation. It is a very important point for you as a presiding officer to protect our parliament from incursion from forces that account to the executive. And it's a parliamentary point, and I'm happy to take it to the Rules Committee with you, but I want it on the record that we are not going to let this matter lie here.
And that, Mr. SONA, is what John Steenhuisen had to say. And to conclude on this one, a lot of people have raised or spoken about, a lot has been said about how the Speaker has been handling things since taking over as the presiding officer of the National Assembly, with some people talking about her temperament. But just to finish a point on this, do you think that Nosiviwe Mapisa Ngagula is going to survive in this position if she continues to handle things the way she has up until now?
By the way, you'll remember that this position was once occupied by Baleka Mbete, who at some point called the EFF cockroaches, that perhaps some things that get done to cockroaches should be done to them. After that, I think, if I remember correctly, they put in Thandimu Dise, who has military training outside of the country in the guerrilla movement. After that, they put Ngagula, who is also trained, I believe, somewhere in the Soviet Union. Now, the problem with some of these people like that, and there are times when I've been impressed with both Thandimu Dise and Ngagula in the calmness and that. I think right now what has happened is that the ANC Stalinists have decided that to hell with this, we're just going to scope and donor somebody right now. That's what we're going to do. And it is at a time when their government is failing completely to deliver electricity, to deliver water, and so on and so forth. So the desperation is all over the show. And I think then Ngagula is in a difficult position, but I'm not sure if that is going to cost her her job. I mean, people in the ANC do all sorts of outrageous things, and they survive. And I mean, she was part of and parcel of that July insurrection in 2021, if I remember correctly, as Minister of Defense. She's been flying people all over using Air Force airplanes as taxis and all sorts of things. So she survived all of this. So I don't think that is the issue here. The issue that South Africans have got to walk away with, and Steenhuisen was very, very mild in his reaction, is that we are seeing an ANC that is totally failing to perform, resorting to ZANU-PF type of tactics that are based on scope and donor type of approach to politics.
Of course, in a week in which the Parliament paid tribute to the very first Speaker of a democratic South Africa, we thought we could go into our archive and bring you this particular soundbite on the back, of course, of the events of last night.
This is a disgrace. Order! Honorable members. Order. I will see the names of every single member in this area of the House I want listed. I want to see all of you in my chamber, 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Will you please take the names? Chief Whip, everyone involved in this altercation. This is unacceptable that you behave like this.
And really, the point we were trying to get to, Prof, by digging that soundbite, is that she was able to. Of course, things are completely different nowadays, but back then she was able to make sure that everyone reads from the same script. No one is going to defy Parliament or do things that shouldn't be done in that House. And I do remember one time when members of the executive started defying her or defying Parliament, not appearing before standing committees or portfolio committees and select committees. She read them the Riot Act. There was a crisis. She made sure. I remember Steve Tshwete was the head of government back then. She made sure that she whips everyone into line, and all political parties respected her. But again, I'm emphasizing the point, Prof, that conditions or the situation was completely different back then. But she did have the respect of everyone and didn't have to resort to what Mr. Swan was calling Stalinist, tendencies.
No, thanks, Boyo. Yes, you're absolutely right. Context is very important here because the period we are referring to is the first democratic dispensation when we moved from apartheid to the new political era. Therefore, context is really important, as you correctly pointed out. But be that as it may, I think Friendly Chinora should be credited for a number of reasons. One, she was the first Speaker of the National Assembly, and she had no point of reference. And therefore, it means that most of the things that she did would have come from outside the country, or at least from other parts of the world, not necessarily from South Africa, because we know what used to happen under apartheid. I still don't have a copy of the apartheid constitution because it was not my constitution, but I have a couple of copies of the current constitution because I consider it to be my constitution. So in the case of Friendly Chinora, there are a couple of things that she should be credited for. One, her sober mind, and two, of being non-partisan in her approach. In other words, she played the ball and not the man or woman, for that matter. In other words, if you went astray, she would cite certain rules to bring you into order without necessarily looking at whether you are coming from the ANC or any political party. Recently, we have heard members of Parliament, more especially those from the opposition benches, crying foul, saying that the presiding officers are partisan and are subjective in their approach, in which case they become lenient to certain members of Parliament and then become too harsh on those on the opposite benches. So given that context, then I think that it's okay for us to look at it then and now, but then even if you compare the ones that have taken over after Friendly Chinora and compare them one against the other, you realize that there were strengths and there were also weaknesses. But the bottom line is, if you're a presiding officer, forget about the party that you come from, just follow the rules and treat everyone equally. Then if we do that, there will definitely be a decorum that will be maintained in Parliament, and then people are going to start respecting you regardless of the party that you come from. Lastly, this call that we must have a speaker who does not come from a political party, I think it's made by people who don't understand how Parliament is constituted. Because before you can be appointed or elected a Speaker of Parliament, you must be a member of Parliament. So then you can't take someone from outside Parliament and say, you become a Speaker. So if we have 400 members of the legislature, so are you going to be 401? Doesn't work like that. So there are things that we have to argue according to law and keep emotions out of that discussion, then we'll get things right.
Now, we've spoken about, what the opposition or leaders of the opposition did last night and whether it was telling us anything about them. We've just spoken about, the speaker, who is, of course, the leader of that other arm of the state, and that is the legislature, and whether her conduct, speaks to both her role, but also the kind of attitude, behavior we would expect of such a person. Up next, I want us to talk a bit about President Cyril Ramaphosa, who is the head of the executive, through some of the things that he said last night. That's coming up in a moment after this short break. Now, among the few new announcements that were made last night by President Cyril Ramaphosa was the declaration of a state of disaster to deal with the electricity crisis, but also the appointment of a Minister of Electricity who will be located in his office. Here's how business has reacted to the latter.
So how does a Minister of for Electricity relate to the Minister of Energy? And where the demarcation of the roles and so on, it just creates confusion, and it's unnecessary in our view. The removal of red tape, the President has the red tape czar in his office. For a year, there's been no progress on that. You don't appoint another minister to remove red tape. Identify where the red tape is and remove it.
And that, Sandile Swana, sums up the reaction of many people to that announcement of a Minister of Electricity.
Yes, this action taken by the State President Ramaphosa is a continuation of the manifestation of cluttered thinking on the part of the president. His thoughts are not refined, they are not distilled, they are muddy. Now, let me say this, that I read the action plan which this energy committee, crisis committee has been formed, and the progress they've made. And it appears to me that indeed this committee has made a lot of progress in resolving the totality of the problems that Eskom is facing. Now, I cannot imagine what this minister will do that this committee is not doing. Number two, EXA, which is the Engineering Society or Engineering Council of South Africa, has offered to help. And in the SONA, Ramaphosa says, we have all the skills, the depth of skills in South Africa to resolve this crisis. There are volunteers out there, professional volunteers, to help this. There's a board of Eskom that can solve the problem. And is adding structure upon structure upon structure everywhere where he goes, this president. Rather than trimming down so that there's clarity, reducing the size of the cabinet to 20, removing all the deputy ministers and decluttering everything around him. He is increasing the confusion around the executive arm of government as we speak today.
Well, Asanda was saying some people have speculated that it's got everything to do with him managing his politics and the politics of his party, because you have, as things stand, we don't know what will happen after the cabinet reshuffle, but as things stand, you have Pravin Gordhan as the Minister of Public Enterprises, you have Gwede Mandashe as the Minister of Energy, and who are both his staunch allies, so he is managing that dynamic, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was actually quite impressive from a strategic point of view, because he needed to dodge this bullet of what to do with Gwede Mandashe and the fact that people are saying he's failed on energy and that he needs to be removed from that portfolio, while also making sure that because he's his political ally, he finds a way to kind of remove him from the heat. And I think this creation of this Ministry of Electricity was a strategic move on his part. I also disagree with Mr. Swana there on the comments around this ministry, because I think we have just had a state of national disaster declared on this very issue. And so clearly you need somebody at a very senior level who kind of is next door, if you think about it from a physical perspective, to the president's office, who's going to be engaging with the president at a high level, at a close level, on what is happening and how the electricity crisis is being sorted out. And I think, people keep saying, oh, what is Eskom going to do if you have this ministry, et cetera, whereas they forget a few things. One is that there is electricity capacity and electricity creation happening outside of Eskom. Eskom is not the only entity that has been creating electricity or that can even create electricity. And having a ministry of electricity allows the government to have a place where there is concentrated effort beyond Eskom on this particular issue. And I think, it's a bit premature to also have, questions around energy and the minerals energy, because the minerals an energy portfolio, because there is a looming cabinet reshuffle. We don't know if that portfolio is going to be broken up and go back to, a ministry of mining and then energy being in a separate entity. We don't know if it's just going to be mining and then the electricity ministry is also going to look after energy, etc.
Okay.
So there are many questions that we still need to ask. We can speculate, but there are still many questions that need to be clear. But I think it is important that the president has said this is a crisis. We've declared it a state of national disaster. I want somebody who's going to be very close to me in the presidency dealing with it. Personally, for me, it gives me some confidence. Of course, there are questions around, he's saving Gwede Mantashe, why? And what is Gwede Mantashe going to actually do? And which portfolio is he going to get? And those are the questions that will be answered once the cabinet reshuffle takes place.
Well, according to Gwede Mantashe, from what he told us last night after the State of the Nation address, Prof, that minister is going to be the project manager for the electricity crisis. Quickly on that one. Prof?
No, Putvo, let us not mince words. Let us not waste time. The decision to appoint a minister of electricity was wrong, totally wrong, on many fronts. One, you already have ministers, we have just pointed out, Pravin Gordhan and Gwede Mantashe, and these people have a direct line to the president. So if they want to report to the president, they can do that 24/7 without any blockage. So if you then create a new ministry, at the time when we are saying that the country does not have money, we are borrowing lots and lots of money, and then we are creating a new ministry, that minister is going to be paid, obviously. I wrote a piece today. I was saying that instead of appointing a minister of electricity, and maybe tomorrow we'll appoint a minister of potholes, minister of unemployment, I don't know. I was saying instead of appointing so many ministers, just commission a 3-month study. If you don't know what the problems are at Eskom, let that person find out for you what the problems are, and then with all the resources that you have, which Mr. SONA just referred to, which the president cited several times, use those resources and address the problem. Forget about appointing a minister of electricity.
Okay, well, we also saw from the president another side last night, and that Cyril Ramaphosa, the philosopher. Let's take a listen.
We are not a nation defined by the oceans and the rivers that form the boundaries of our land. We are not defined by the minerals under our earth or the spectacular landscape above it. We are not even defined by the languages and the cultures that we have as a people, or by the songs that we sing, or even by the work that we do. We are, at our most essential, a nation defined by hope and resilience.
Well, couldn't help but think of our former president. Take a listen to him, using some of those words that Cyril Ramaphosa uttered last night.
I owe my being to the hills and the valleys, the mountains and the glades, the rivers, the deserts, the trees, the flowers, the seas, and the ever-changing seasons that define the face of our native land.
And in case you are wondering what drives our president, who inspires him on a day-to-day basis to do the little that, no, to do the little that he can do. Here was his explanation.
I've often asked myself, as president, and asked myself, why am I doing this job? I've often asked myself that. And there's that voice inside of me that always says, I want you to listen, because you have your own voices. This voice always says,
Order.
Follow in the footsteps of Nelson Mandela. Because he made great sacrifices. He didn't have to do what he did for this country, but he made great sacrifices. And that voice always says, contribute the little that you can to make this country great. And that is precisely what I am doing.
We've run out of time, but I'm going to give you 10 seconds each. Are we likely to see a rejuvenated Cyril Ramaphosa this year on the back of that speech we listened to last night, but also the fact that, he has just started his new and last term as ANC president? Prof, 10 seconds.
Yes, I think that he will be rejuvenated because he has enough support in the NEC, he has enough support in the NWC. He knows that he has a number of people who can support him. But will it sustain him? I'm not sure. Is that good? I think it is bad because he will only have cheerleaders and not people who are going to control him whenever the need arises.
San Leswana? Mr. Swana, can you hear us? Okay, looks like he's gone. Asanda?
I think that, Cyril Ramaphosa is in a pretty sweet spot in terms of the ANC, as has been said, and he has nothing to prove because this is his last tenure, and this gives him the opportunity to make some bold decisions, to be more creative and to be more innovative. I don't know if he necessarily will take that opportunity, but one can only hope. I think it's sad that it's taken us being dragged to the doldrums for him to rediscover his passion and try to re-energize us. And I don't know if that's going to, be something that will satisfy South Africans at this point, because he's shown himself to be more of a chairman of a board than the president of the country in his actions.
And that's where we're going to leave it for tonight and for this evening. Thank you for watching. Do join us again next week on Monday. Have a great weekend.